May my words and our combined thoughts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our refuge and our Redeemer. And those words are from Psalm 19, verse 14. Thank you for that reading, Mel. All of the Gospels record the story of the storm on Lake Galilee, but Mark probably wrote his account a decade ahead of the others. These four records suggest the importance they placed on these stories. And Mark had a wonderful way with words. His explanations throughout his gospel are quite different to what you read in the others. Mark used these stories and parables using pictures that people could understand and to help his listeners. At Easter, 10th of April, 1968, a cricket team from Lincoln College was heading to the University Easter Sports Tournament at Massey on the Wahine. Most of us can recall that day very, very clearly. I know Pam and I, radio in those days, no TV, kept listening to see what was happening. New Zealand is not new to tragedies of this nature, and from the beginning of our European and pre-European history, there has been a long list of disasters, both on land, in the air, and at sea. The Tarawera eruption, the Hawke's Bay earthquake, Valentine's fire, Tangawhai train disaster, Mount Erebus, Waikari, White Island. Can't we all remember those? Wahine was the worst maritime disaster in our history, when 51 died on the day and 2 more later as a result of injuries. An interesting article in The Guardian on the 15th of May told the story of another type of disaster, relating the story of the Fry family and how Henry Sr. sailed on the Whitby from Gravesend in 1841, taking 5 months to arrive in New Zealand. His wife Anne followed with Henry Jr. on the ship the Lloyds, which arrived in Nelson in 1842. The disaster in this instance was how on that ship, 67 children under the age of 14 died on the journey from an outbreak of whooping cough, including young Henry. We don't remember that, but we read about it. In his very recent book, published late in 2023, Peter Jerram, a veterinarian from Blenheim, relates the experience on the Wahine that day. I never knew him at Lincoln, as I was completing my first degree the year when he started. However, the University Association and later his veterinary practice in my hometown of Blenheim after graduation, made me very aware that young men were at the mercy of the sea at the entrance to Wellington Harbour on that day. His research for the book he wrote, The Team That Hit the Rocks, expresses the absolute fear of many on that ship. Fear of rolling over and being trapped under the water. Fear of sliding furniture, being hit and maybe killed. The fear of having to jump from the ship into the broiling water and not being picked up and maybe blown out to sea. It was pretty obvious there were no lifeboats in Jesus' day, no life rafts and no life jackets. There were many heroes on the Wahine that day, including this team of young cricketing men, as well as the heroism of the small boats and the rescue boats who came out in atrocious seas to assist. But they could only do so much. Back to our reading that Mel shared with us. When the storm began, it was like a washing machine, and waves started coming into the boat, and the fear of swamping was imminent. Jesus was in the stern asleep. He had been preaching and telling stories all day and was exhausted and just needed to get away from the crowd. All 12 disciples were in the boat with him, we're told, and this included Peter, Andrew, James and John, all who were fishermen and who could well be aware of how the Sea of Galilee could cut up rough. But even these fishermen were frightened this time, while the others on the boat were probably more than terrified. The reading says that other boats accompanied them with folks who had been listening to him earlier. Yet, despite that, Jesus slept peacefully in the back of the boat. In this story, realistic conditions of the conditions that can be experienced on this inland sea, about 2/3 the area of our own Lake Rotorua. One feature is that it is 200 metres below sea level and surrounded by sharply rising hills that funnel the warm air rising from the water. Google says the waves can be so huge, and we can visualise what they were experiencing in that small boat. In 1633, Rembrandt painted his only seascape painting. Have we got that picture available, Clive? There's a picture of the painting. This was stolen in 1990 from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts, and it's never been seen since. Rembrandt painted this when he was 29, and it was believed to be the largest known historical work that he ever completed, 1.6 metres by 1.28 metres. It's a magnificent picture, and if you can see that on the screen, I'm looking at the small screen and it's sort of downsized a little bit, but it is a magnificent picture when you look at the detail. The writer of one biblical commentary about the Sea of Galilee states that he was on a tour across that very sea and asked the Israeli guide if he had ever seen such a storm as recorded in the Bible. And he replied, shaking his head, "And I never want to be in one like that again." So this is a true story of the conditions, nothing unusual for this sea, but not a time to be out in it. Jesus had given his listeners the parables when teaching his disciples the word, and now he would give them a practical test to see how much they had really learned. After all, the hearing of God's word is intended to produce faith, as we read in Romans 10:17, and faith must always be tested. It's not enough for us merely to learn a lesson. We must be able to practice that lesson in our lives by faith. And that is one reason why God permits trials to come to our lives. There are 3 good reasons why none of the men on the boat should have been disturbed. Firstly, they felt abandoned and foolishly accused him of not caring. "How can you put us through this and you sleep without concern?" Strange he was so relaxed in this stormy situation. Here we see Jesus' leadership qualities at their very best. Coolness and confidence, courage and faith. He rebukes the waves and the wind, and it falls calm. This leaves us and the men on the boat in no doubt of the unique relationship that he had with God his Father. Creating a storm is one thing, stopping it is something else. Who knows how we would react in this situation until we are truly tested? Timidity or cowardice or faith? Fearful disciples on the boat, fearless apostles of the church. Jesus wanted to go to the other side. The disciples had the boat. What was the problem? He never promised an easy trip, but he did promise a guaranteed arrival at their destination. Is there a lesson there for us too? Secondly, the Lord himself was with them, so that was what was there to fear? Already they had seen his power demonstrated in his miracles, so they should have had complete confidence that he could handle the storm situation. And finally, they could see that Jesus was perfectly at peace, even in the midst of the storm. This fact alone should have encouraged them. He knew the Father would care for him, and so he took a nap. Jesus slept in the storm because he was truly secure in God's will. When I lie down to go to sleep in peace, you alone, O Lord, will keep me perfectly safe. Psalm 4, verse 8. Jesus had a body just like ours, hunger, thirst, suffered pain, needed sleep, became exhausted. He'd been preaching, healing, talking in the open air all day, dust and heat, probably very little to eat and to drink. We can all relate to a really busy day and the feeling of exhaustion when things finally eased off and they pushed off from the shore, heading to the other side, away from some of the crowd and a chance for rest. In fact, you can almost meld into the situation as he snuggled up under the nets and paraphernalia in the stern. In Mark's special way, we're told he had a pillow to put his head on. And as the daylight faded into darkness, he was soon asleep. I know how easy it is for me after a busy day to go to sleep in front of the TV after tea. Pam would say, you go to sleep before tea. He knows the difficulties we face in our everyday lives and understands them all. He knows when we call out for help as we face the hardships of the world in which we live. Though life was simple, he and his friends still had to earn a living, to build homes and families, to face the terror of oppression, often wondered where the next meal would come from, had to keep their precious animals safe from predators and plenty of others who would steal and kill for their own gains. Doesn't this sound like reading our newspapers today? He is always present for men and women who are tired and suffer aches and pains, need someone to comfort and love them every night. Reverend Andrew, in his early reflections at St Andrews, preached about the Good Shepherd who would go after the one lost sheep until it is finally found and carry it back to the flock. So our Jesus understands our individual situations, and he can sympathise with our weaknesses. Like us, he has been tempted and faced all the same things that we face each day in our normal life. It was nothing unusual for us or his disciples in the boat to show a great lack of faith and great and unnecessary panic for their own safety. They'd forgotten all about the miracles and care that he had given them in recent days. And don't we do the same? Like us, they couldn't see past their current predicament. Just like us when the going gets tough. What about the good and wonderful miracles in our lives? From time to time we all encounter rough waters, storms in our lives. And I wouldn't downplay the troubles many face, the unexpected illness, the loss of a partner, a child, a loved one, the storms or other acts of nature that wrecked our house, the loss of our career, the meth-addicted family members and friends, and those raising grandchildren through no fault of their own, the fear of going to work and being abused. Panicked. They woke him. "Teacher, don't you care if we are about to die?" Are these our words too? Jesus stood up and he commanded the wind to be quiet and the waves to be stilled, and there was a great calm. Finished as quickly as it started, and by my reading, nothing at all unusual for this area. "Why are you afraid?" he said. "Have you still no faith?" What an overstatement. They were terribly afraid and said to one another, "Who is this man? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And they continued to the other side. How often in the trials of life we are like the faithless disciples and cry out, "Lord, don't you care?" Of course he cares, just as a mother or a father cares for her or his children. So the Lord cares for us. Jesus understands our weaknesses. He never forgets because he was just like us, with doubts, fears, and all those things that we often worry about. How he treats us is a lesson to us all, an example to us of how we should treat our families, our neighbours, and all those who we are dealing with. We light our candle of peace every week and pray for those we don't know and don't understand, or who have different beliefs to ours. But do we really understand their position? Can we truly know what it's like to have our town, our village, our family, and our friends bombed, destroyed, or killed? And yesterday, just on the news yesterday, a report from Gaza where there has been the first outbreak of polio. The effect of poor sanitation, dirty water, and all those things that allows the virus to move. Can we relate to the fear in the little open boat or the wahine? But we have lots of opportunities to live our faith, and we do. Our giving to Yangon, our assistance to grandparents raising grandchildren, the relationship with our Turkish friends, sharing the richness of our Nivan RSE workers and what they bring to our worship. Our input into dozens of community volunteer organisations. The list is endless, and some measure of our faith in this town. We are human. We all have doubts. We all wonder if we do enough. We share. We give. We wonder. This huge storm that blew out of nowhere concerned the disciples on the boat, yet Jesus slept on, testing his friends in a most vivid way. He tests us too, maybe not in such a setting, but in our daily lives. Sometimes the storm and rough water can become almost unbearable, yet he is a Lord of compassion, of love, and has been there himself. Never forget, I am with you always, till the ends of the earth, both night and day, in times of calm and times of massive upheaval. Wow, what a relief when the storm abated. More like acceptance or even joy. They were with Jesus. This is the call to our faith community here at St Andrews, to be with Jesus. He is our lifeboat. He is our life raft. He is our life jacket. And we have to learn to let go and trust him. Let us pause and consider.